Hello everyone and welcome to Scicomm Monday. I'm your host, Nicole Wood. For those of you who are new to the broadcast, we try to make Scicomm Monday as engaging a platform as possible, so please feel free to send any of your questions and comments in through the integrated chat module on Periscope. And then for those of you who are watching the broadcast on replay, please feel free to send in your questions via our various Twitter handles, so you can reach me either at the Scicomm Monday handle or at my personal handle of Wildlife BioGal. Today we're going to be talking with Dr. JeffreyThompson. He does a lot of amazing work down in Paraguay with pumas and jaguars and a bunch of other wildlife there. And you can reach him by his handle of @DrJJ_Thompson. And so with that, I'd like to thank Jeffrey Thompson for being on with us today. Thanks for being here, Jeffrey.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for the opportunity.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, so everyone who finds your research, really exciting and everything, if there's, grad students out there, they can have a path to follow. And then for everyone else out there, we kind of know where it is that you come from and, what got you into the field that you're currently in right now.
Sure. Well, that's my background. I did my my bachelor's at SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry in biology. Then I did my master's at the University of Puerto Rico, Rio Piedras, and my doctorate at University of Georgia, Cornell School of Forestry and Natural Resources, where I did my doctoral research in Argentina. And I was a Fulbright alum then. After that, I actually went to work for the Argentine government in the Instituto Nacional de Tecnología Agropecuaria, which is kind of the equivalent of the USDA, at least the research branch, working with wildlife in production systems, agro-grazing ecosystems. And I also worked for the UN environmental program during that time as a biodiversity monitoring coordinator. And after that, that's when I moved to Paraguay, where I'm now a researcher in the Consejo Nacional de Ciencia y Tecnología, which is the National Science Council of Paraguay. I'm also associated researcher with the domestic NGO, Guira Paraguay, which is the principal conservation NGO, a domestic NGO in Paraguay. And I'm also a member of the Paraguayan Scientific Society. So that's my background. My research interests are really centered in Latin America, but I've done stuff in other places. But the effects of land use on wildlife, basically agriculture and grazing, although forestry as well, and understanding this interaction of how we can conserve wildlife within production ecosystems while also producing food that the world needs. And so working in Southern South America, when I started my doctoral research in 2001, there was just a huge push at that time in that region from row crops and grazing expansion, basically for global commodities. So I was kind of in the right place at the right time. And although I worked in, so there's these effects, these proximate effects or direct effects of land use on wildlife, whether it be, nest success or other things, survival, etc. One of the questions always that came up was predation. And it was, for a long time, I handled it as a factor that, there was survival, there was predation, but not directly understanding what was going on in to predators and how that then affected other species, prey species. And over time, I became more interested in trophic effects and trophic cascades, and that's what led me up to what I'm doing now. I'm interested in those effects of large predators at lower trophic levels, both other smaller predators as well as prey species, and how, okay, what we do with the land affects that. And so just that's I think as concise as I can be.
Yeah, like how do you be concise when you're trying to sum up, a decade, 2 decades of work? It's always so much fun. Like, okay, how do you squeeze that down into just a couple of minutes of, here's my background? Yeah, so I guess, what I'm curious is what inspired you to start making that move south to do your research and everything? I mean, it's not, very common that you hear of people going out of country to do their research. Was it just that was what was on the plate there for your doctoral research and then you just got hooked, or what was it? Or just have you always loved, regions further south of the U.S.?
Yeah, I always had an interest in the tropics. And that's why actually as an undergrad, I started working in Puerto Rico in the long-term ecological research project there for Robert Wade, who became my major professor for my master's. He's the director of the LTR program now. And so I went there during the summers. I started working. And then I said, well, I had to do my master's. I said, well, some opportunities. And I went there, and I wanted to do more. And I was always interested in Argentina and the agricultural system there. There was just a personal interest there. And a lot of things fell into place that it was just very strange. I don't believe in destiny or anything like that, but it was really, sometimes it was scary the way things turned out. And, so I wound up spending, because of that, I wound up spending about a quarter of my life in Argentina until I moved from there and I went to Paraguay. So it was just an interest in some dumb luck, which I think everybody needs. But I did work at it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you with the dumb luck aspect and some fate to some things. Because, sometimes it just seems like, wow, all you have to do is be randomly sitting next to someone on a plane, and the next thing you know, your career all of a sudden shoots off in a different direction than you ever expected it could. Or, it could be, just someone you randomly met, or just whatever else it is. And next thing you know, you're off on this whole other path than what you ever realized, but you're so happy now that you're on that path.
It seems that happens a lot. I mean, a lot of people, have told me stories, and it's, they just met somebody and asked, hey, do you need looking for a grad student? And it's, oh yeah, by the way, I do. And that was it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does seem like science is filled with those stories.
So yeah, that's long story short.
So I guess, since you're doing so much of your work out of country, and especially another country that deals with different languages than, what we, normally speak here in the U.S., has that been a tremendous issue? Like, what have been some of the obstacles that you've had to overcome with working in foreign countries?
It's funny. I never spoke Spanish. I spoke Italian. I actually in junior high school. In high school, I studied Italian, and I didn't speak any Spanish. And I started working in Puerto Rico and kind of picked up some stuff. But it's the U.S. territory. A lot of people speak English. A lot of people don't. But a lot of times you try speaking Spanish and somebody spoke English as well as you, and there was no point in it.
It just made it easier to converse that way then.
Yeah. Even as a grad student, it wasn't that necessary, but I got much better. And then when I started my doctorate, I took a intensive class, and that pulled everything together. And at the same time, I took a intensive class of Portuguese, which in 5 weeks, I was reading in Portuguese.
Wow.
It was enough, Romance languages are similar enough that the words might be different, but you do the same thing in the same place. And then obviously just being immersed is really the key. I spent so much time and that's it. You have to. And I'm still, I wouldn't say, I'm not 100%, but I don't write that well in Spanish, but, I have no, I have no issue, getting around. Aside from, you go from one country to the other in Latin America, and the accent's very different, and a lot of words are very different. And so, there's an issue there.
Yeah, I find it's interesting that you say like you can't write as well as what you speak. For me, I have the opposite issue with French. Like I can read and write fairly decent, but actually speaking in French, it's just like people talk too fast and I just can't quite keep up with it. And by the time I realize, oh, I know what they're talking about, it's like, oh, they've already moved on. But like with reading, it's like I could take my time a little bit and I can see the words, and I'm a little bit easier that way.
Well, I understand that, because with Portuguese, especially with Brazilians, depending what part of Brazil they're from, sometimes I just hear them and it's just one long sentence to me. But if I watch a movie with subtitles, or I've actually watched movies with Portuguese subtitles, I understand everything. So I can read without a problem. It's just sometimes the accent is different, and if you're not used to it, and that all comes back to practice, and that's basically what languages are. I live in Paraguay now, which is a bilingual country. They speak Spanish and Guarani, which is Native American language. I have a real hard time with Guarani because it's just completely different. And I haven't made that much of an effort either. I mean, I admit it to learn it. So, again, if I did make an effort, yes, I'd be better at it. But still, it's something, especially when you get on in a career. There's so many other things I have to do. So to sit down and actually try to learn another language takes time. So.
Yeah, it definitely is, and it probably adds to the complexity of what you're trying to do, because it's not only you're having to do the science, but you're also having to deal with that other language. So it definitely, I'm assuming, adds to all the time and effort that you're having to put in just to do your job, because you have that whole other complexity added onto it.
Yeah, well, I've made one of the things, and we'll talk about my research, but then for my teaching aspect, I've made a real big effort in teaching quantitative ecology and decision making in Spanish. I've co-authored 2 books on wildlife population parameter estimation. That's in Spanish. That's online, free. And then another book, edited volume in Argentina, that was on structured decision making and adaptive management, again in Spanish, to make things more accessible to the Spanish-speaking scientific community. Because in my struggles, I was very sympathetic to dealing with so many other professionals and students who might speak English. Some speak English very well, but when you're dealing with some more complex math, mathematical stuff, which again is another language. So you have people that are studying a language in a second language. It was hard, so I understood that, and I was very sympathetic to that. So all my teaching I do is in Spanish, all the course materials, and it's a lot of stuff that generally is not available in Spanish for Spanish researchers, especially undergraduates.
Yeah, so I'm definitely very sympathetic to that too, because I've taught some students where English is their second language, and it was always just so impressive to me, like how well that they were able to do, because not only are they having to actively learn a very difficult subject, because we all know science can be very difficult, but then to add on top of, having to learn another language while they're there. I mean, they might already know some aspects of it, but it's always different, like you say, once you completely immerse yourself in a culture and, dealing with regional dialects and, all the slang that we have and everything. It was just always super impressed me how well they could do. And it was just, I couldn't imagine being in that position. I would have just been at a loss, but I think you really are right. The best way is to just immerse yourself into that culture, and then you're going to be off and flying better than, just doing it kind of behind the scenes like I've been doing with my French. So
it's not easy. Sometimes you have to have tough skin. I had my moments where I was like, all right, I'm out of here. But then, yeah, I had a couple beers and it went by.
Everyone understands things a little easier with a couple beers.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's what I should do. Just go up to Montreal and have a couple beers with people, and then, hopefully the French will start flying.
I'll do it.
So, talking about your science and everything down there, why don't you tell us all a little bit more about some of the projects that you're working with there? Because I found it very interesting. I mean, obviously, anytime you're working with large carnivores, you always, get those big, huge, fun animals that everyone likes to see on the Discovery Channel, but you actually get to work with those on a daily basis. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the projects that you're working with down there when it comes to especially those big megafauna?
Okay. First off, I work in country Republic of Paraguay, which is right in the middle of Argentina, north of Argentina, south of Brazil, and east of Bolivia. So it's landlocked country that 7 million people, and it's basically divided. 40% of Paraguay, eastern Paraguay, was Atlantic forest. And the other 60%, the western part, which is west of the Rio Paraguay, is the Gran Chaco ecosystem, which is the second largest forested ecosystem in South America. A lot of people aren't aware of it. It's second to the Amazon. Although other biomes are larger within South America, like the Patagonian steppes or Cerrado, it's the second largest forested ecosystem. And you can see on the map, it's basically right there in the middle of the country, middle of the continent. Paraguay is that country that looks like a peanut, and the Gran Chaco can be roughly divided into two systems: the humid Chaco and the dry Chaco. The humid Chaco is farther to the east, has a very strong rainfall gradient as you go from east to west of about 1 millimeter per year per kilometer. So every time you go a kilometer west, you get 1 millimeter of rainfall less per year. So as you start getting towards the Andes, it gets really dry. And these systems, it's actually the westernmost part of the dry Chaco is like a dune system, and because it's such a harsh system, most of the dry Chaco, where most of my research is now, what we'll be talking about is mostly about that, has been kind of an empty quarter for up till about 100 years ago. In the 1930s, it was basically just for indigenous Native American tribes who were there, very few people of European descent. And in the 1930s, a population of Mennonites settled in the dry Chaco, founded the city of Philadelphia and then the other of Loma Plata. And they developed, they came from Russia and the Ukraine and developed their community, German-speaking community, basically in isolation. It wasn't until the late 1980s that actually asphalt highway made it to Philadelphia. So they were basically isolated, and there was very little development in the Gran Chaco. However, starting about 2000, there's been some big changes occurring in Paraguay. Paraguay is now the 6th leading exporter of beef in the world. And what happened was, as the Atlantic forest in eastern Paraguay was deforested and developed for soybean mostly in the 1980s, it was very fast, and whereby now there's about 7% of the original forest remains, the Atlantic forest. And so it went mostly to soybean for this development, and it moved cattle production from the eastern portion of the country, where 96% of the population lives, to the western portion in the Chaco. And so we've seen some highest rates of deforestation in the world since 2000 in the dry Chaco. if it for the whole system, which the dry Chaco is in Argentina, Bolivia, and Paraguay mostly. 1% in Brazil, but the grand majority is in those three countries. On average, it's been about 1,300 hectares per day of deforestation on average for the last about 17 years. And in Paraguay, it's been about 800 hectares per day on average. And there's just been, it's just some massive amounts of deforestation that's occurred very rapidly to develop as this livestock production sector had grown so rapidly. And so my research is, and those are my colleagues, has been centered around that, because there's a lot of talk about, okay, what does this mean? What does this mean for conservation? So, so we had this growth. There was some cattle production all the way through 2000 within the country. Then from there, it really took off for this export market, mostly going to Chile and Russia, although there's a lot of other countries. And that's what's driven this deforestation. So what does it mean? By law, at least it depends on where the land is. Anywhere from 25% to 50% of the land has to remain in forest, and also with what they call curtains, which are forest strips between pastures. It's required to maintain them. So there's these issues of, okay, what does this mean? Is this enough forest area to maintain biodiversity, connectivity, etc.? And so myself and the other principal investigators of mine, I mentioned Marianela Velilla, Pepe Cartes, and Juan Campos. In one project we have is a large-scale camera trapping project to look at the effects on the large and medium-sized mammal community of this deforestation. So we're sampling along a gradient of deforestation intensity, looking at not only composition of these communities, but occurrence within sites and among sites. So we're using community occupancy models, looking at factors such as use of pasture, use of these forest strips, use of what they call reserves, the forest reserves. So basically intact forest, and there's also in conjunction with this development of these ranch lands come stock tanks, for example. So there's also often more standing water in than there was before, and so that's also an issue that a lot of people point out. Well, this is a good thing, and so those are the issues we're looking at. Just at the so along as deforestation gets more intense or land use gets more intense, what's happening with the community of large and medium-sized mammals, its composition, and the occurrence of various species. Because in all the sites we're actually sampling, we do have a complete community. We do have jaguars and pumas, but in some sites they're much less common than others. So, are we seeing what kind of trophic effects we're interested in seeing, and what kind of avoidance there is of pasture lands and things, and what's the relationship with the landscape composition?
Yeah, it definitely seems like an issue that a lot of places are having, of where there is so much development happening and they're trying to be able to keep up with protecting the wildlife that is there. Do you find that is the government there being very proactive with helping to protect all of these species, or they're kind of just trying to keep up with the development and struggling to be able to protect everything?
Basically, it's full throttle for development. Just right now, what's happened in the last about month, there came out a decree from the president trying to, this is the requirement of maintaining a certain amount of land or not, or in forest is law, but it just came out, a decree came out which basically nullifies that. And the first permit for that went to the president of the republic to to deforest one of his ranches. And
so the president's not even walking or not walking the talk that we need to have happen to be able to protect that. So it really is kind of setting the precedent or setting the precedent there, of like,
there's a lot of people, and it's unfortunate because there's a very large sector of the ranching community that they do dot the I's and cross the T's, and they're very interested in it. And myself and my colleagues are actually working with the Rural Association of Paraguay now, which is the representation of the community. And it's very important to understand something. In Paraguay, as in many places, there's very little public land. Even though there's some in the Chaco, there's some very large protected areas. The one where I work close to is over 700,000 hectares, which abuts another one that's over 500,000. So that's a huge area. But less than 5% of the western Paraguay is in protected areas. So that means that 95%, more than 95% of the land is in private hands. So
how does that compare to the U.S.? I know we have a lot of public lands here, but I don't really know what the percentage is. Do you happen to know what the comparison is?
I don't remember, but it's much higher than, and obviously it depends on where you are. You can go like Texas, for example, there's very little public land. And, many of the Western states is very high. So it does depend on where you are. But what does that mean? That means that if we're going to do anything as far as conservation, it's all dependent upon the ranching community. And unfortunately, too often, as say in Spanish, they make the rancher comes out as the bad guy in the movie. El malo de la película, dice. And it's not the case. And it's also, that's everywhere, even in the United States. People, they'll rail against, farmers and ranchers, but, that's who has the land. And a lot of these people, they're just trying to make some money. They're just trying to,
they're just trying to make successful. A living for themselves and their families. And they're also providing the food that we need to be able to survive. So it's, we have to work with them so that way they can be successful, but also still protect the environment. So it's definitely, I'm very sympathetic to those who farm and everything. And like you said, I mean, they aren't always the bad guys. They're just, like you said, trying to make their living and providing a service for the rest of us. Because without them, I would be going hungry tonight.
Yeah, exactly. And, and it's important. And it's important that these people know that, the producers. And, that's one of the things that I always harp upon, that not everybody wants to, make a parking lot out of their property. And actually, in my experience, the large majority doesn't. So it's important to take that into account. And there, Paraguay had, a brutal dictatorship of 36 years that ended in the mid-1980s. And, there's still a lot of growing pains associated with that. I also was in Argentina a lot of years. Again, was still dealing with the aftermath of dictatorships and so a history of, corrupt politics that's very ingrained. In Paraguay, it's a little more so. There's very little. The level of education is just starting to get better. Now we have the National Science and Technology Council. There's all this research that we're doing. It's funded by the CONACYT, as it's called. All my research is funded by that. And so they're putting a huge emphasis on research and on education, giving opportunities for grad students to go outside the country, or even undergrads to go outside the country to study, and giving them incentives to come back, a reason to come back, and actually practice being a scientist within the country. And
so you're not
that's
necessarily
something
having that brain drain. Then you're actually, making it where they can go get the skills they need and then help improve the country.
Exactly, because that's what happened. If you were able to go out and they go to study in Brazil and they got a job and that's it, nobody ever came back. And I said one thing bad about this administration, but then on the other side, they really not only did they put a lot of money into this last 4 years now. In the process, they actually raised it. They increased it as there was a lot of people trying to dip their hands in the pot. They protected it, and it's I'm very grateful. I mean, all my collaborators are. So so that's a good thing. But there's going to be a delay in what that means. How that translates into effective conservation. There's a lot of people, some very qualified people that we do have in Paraguay, but it's kind of like you're holding up a tissue in the wind, something in a hurricane, when you have all these other things, and money always talks, and we're trying to find that middle ground. That's exactly what the research is oriented to, is how can we do everything right and everybody win,
right?
And sooner better than later.
So speaking of doing things right, let's talk about some of the animals that you actually are working with down there, and telling us a little bit about what you're seeing, as far as those various species, and give us a little bit of background, because not everyone knows about the different species that you're working with down there.
Okay. Well, our maybe starting from top down, the charismatic megafauna, dealing with the jaguar and puma are the apex predators, and the jaguar is dominant. And then we have smaller. We'll stay with the cats. The smaller cats are the Jeffrey's cat, which is the smallest, which is about house cat size, and the jaguarundi, which is a kind of strange cat, diurnal cat, really moves in the day and has various color phases throughout its range. It's found from southern Texas into Argentina. It's a species. The Jeffrey's cat's found throughout southern South America. These are species that are very common. And then the ocelot's right in the middle, which is kind of medium-sized cat. So you have this community of 5 cats, which is kind of interesting. And then ungulates are always kind of, South America doesn't necessarily compare anything to like Africa or even other continents other than Australia. But the largest mammal that we have is the tapir, the low-end tapir. And in the dry Chaco is the only place where you can find the world's 3 species of peccaries. So there's the collared peccary and the white-lipped peccary, which is found. Collared peccary is found from southwestern U.S. Well into Argentina. The white-lipped peccary is a tropical species, but from Mexico into northern Argentina. But then there's the Chacoan peccary, which is only found in the dry Chaco. It's often called a living fossil because it was known by fossils, but wasn't rediscovered or discovered by Western civilization until 1972, I believe it was. Wow. Even though if you go and you read some accounts of explorers, they actually talk about 3 species of peccary, but they don't give it any name. And the Chacoan peccary is endemic to the dry Chaco. It's only found in that area. So that's an interesting thing about working in dry Chaco is, it's the only place you can find the world's 3 peccary species. And so obviously with this deforestation that we're witnessing, that's one of the species of major concern because it's only found in that system. And we don't have range-wide estimates of population, although we have some relatively educated guesses on it. But it is a forest-dependent species, and so there's a lot of concern about it. And then there's we have a diverse community of medium-sized mammals. We have 2 fox species, the crab-eating fox and the pampas fox, and 2 anteaters, a giant anteater, and the the southern tamandua, which is more arboreal species. Several mustelids, such as the daira, which is kind of a cross between. It looks kind of like a cat, but there was a picture of that. The daira, and I think what we're talking about, 4 or 5 species of above ground armadillos. There's actually some burrowing armadillos, and one of the charismatic species of those is the giant armadillo, which is, it gets up to, there's actually been over 50 kilos. It's actually been, but generally, over 30 kilos it can get up to. It's a big armadillo. And that's an important ecosystem engineer. And so there's a very interesting, diverse community of mammals in the area. So, and some we know just through experience that some are more sensitive to land use than others. And so, again, with this project where it's a camera trapping project, we have we start out with 440 cameras. So we sampling, like right now, we have about 350 cameras in the field right now in double camera trapping stations. So we're interested we're quantifying this habitat use and species occurrence and species composition of the mammalian community with that project. We're in our 2nd year of it now. We're just about we're going to be finishing up soon. It looks like we're going to end up with about 2.5 million photos.
Wow. So have fun processing all of that.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of photo identification, but that's going to probably, I estimate, it's going to distill to about 200 to 250,000 detections of individual species.
I mean, that sounds like that's game for a citizen science project help right there. So.
We considered it, but we've actually we have enough people doing this stuff, and it looks like it actually goes pretty fast. Every time, it would be great if this was automated. That's where things are going, as far as IDing photos. But so we're not there yet. But it's gone pretty fast. So. I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Like, I know from the camera trapping I've done, it seems like it's a lot of pictures of moving shadows of trees or grass that just happens to wave, and you're just like, okay, when am I actually going to get to the species that I'm hoping to find?
There's a lot of that, and then we work in these ranching systems, so there's a lot of cow legs, a lot of cows, and when they knock over the camera and. But things are actually water buffalo even worse. They like to rub against the cameras.
That seems like a pretty good scratching post. I could see that.
Yeah, but it's really good buffalo bait as a camera trap. So you get a lot of those types of photos. So it actually makes things easier to classify because you have there'll be 9,000 photos of cow legs and just over 2 days. Something like that, and then or after they rotate the pasture, and then it's all fine. But it was obvious in doing, as we started getting into this, I said, this is one of the reasons why people have not done this before, because the technology has just gotten to the point where now it's fine. You put the camera on to take 6 photos, and you leave the camera for 6 weeks, and we go back and change the cards out, and it's fine. Mm-hmm. The battery, the cameras are good enough that the batteries stay alive. The batteries are good enough to keep it charged. They hold up to the heat. We get well into, well over 100. I was in the middle of winter. It was 102 in August one day. And so the camera sitting out there in the sun, obviously, it's an issue, and we've had no problems. And that's all things, thanks to the technology as it's gotten better, we're able to do this. We're not in a situation where we can, regularly go out and check these things. It takes often 2 days to get to the field.
Yeah, how widespread is your camera traps? Because I mean, you're saying that you're doing double camera traps, so you roughly have about 200 different, camera spots out there. Like, how widespread is your sampling area?
Well, the idea was to keep them about anywhere between 1.5 to 2 kilometers apart, or even a little less, because we're dealing with this whole community of species. So we're dealing from armadillos that might be using a few hectares to jaguars that have home ranges of 90,000 hectares. So it's a little different, but so on a 50,000 hectares, for example, we had about 110 camera stations over, and it depends on access too.
Right.
It's a lot. It's great. You can have the perfect study design and all that, but it's also the reality of situation is that we're dependent on fire breaks and trails within the property, and then we even had situations where I have cameras that we can't recover. We can't get back to where they were. We were able to drive in before, and now we can't. And so
either because of rancher access, or because the climate's changed, where now you've got a river there that there wasn't a river before, or all of the above.
Well, it's just the vegetation's grown up, and we need a tractor to get in there and things like that. There was a lot of things. We've lost various cameras to bulldozers and to tractors and fire.
Okay.
And you come back and you find the metal clamp from the camera, and that's
but
it.
Nothing else.
Yeah, and another case, usually we've recovered more things, more memory cards than we should have. We got a camera that was just completely smashed, and then you got the memory card, and
nice.
It's like, yay, we got the data, we got the data.
That's always a good find. So let me just remind everyone out there who's tuning in, if you've got any questions for Dr. Jeffrey Thompson or myself, we're talking about his research with large megafauna down in Paraguay in the dry Chaco region. Down there, he's doing a lot of camera trap work with pumas and jaguars and other wildlife there, looking at the impacts of ranching and development has had in that particular country, in that region. So definitely feel free to send in your questions via the Periscope chat, and then also if you're watching this on replay, definitely feel free to send in your questions via our various chat handles. So how many different species, I know we went through some of the species that you've seen on the camera traps, but how many different species have you actually seen on the camera traps down there?
Of mammals, well, it generally in what would be the pure dry Chaco, no transitional areas. I think 27 species. I'm just trying to remember because then it's funny, there's species that we might in the dry Chaco showed up in one site was a coati, which is a common species in South America, but not in dry forest. And it's like, whoa, and that's weird. It's also semi-arboreal. So, but then we had one site that was kind of a transition between Chiquitano Forest, which is it's right near the Bolivian border. Chiquitano is another dry forest system, but it's not Chaco. And it's also Pantanal and dry Chaco. There's a site that has all these things. And so we started getting a lot of species that were from more humid areas, like agouti, which are in the Pantanal. Paraguay has 5% of the Pantanal.
Okay.
And so that's right on along the Rio Paraguay. And actually, it's the Chaco that forms the Pantanal, because the Rio Paraguay kind of backs up. It runs along there, and it's higher in Paraguay, and it kind of serves as a dam to push the water northward into Bolivia and in Brazil.
Interesting.
And in Paraguay, it's actually like a floodplain. There's not a lot of forest. It's just along rivers, and then actually moves downward. I mentioned the human Chaco before. The Pantanal transitions into the human Chaco, which is just along the Rio Paraguay, but it opens up more. And vegetationally, there's a lot of similarities, but there's differences, and where the line is. What's human Chaco and what's Pantanal is not exactly it's not exactly clear, but
it's more anyway, that interspersed.
Yeah. So we get sometimes in those transitional systems you get some species from these dry forest species. Humid forest or Pantanal species entering dry forest, and also you lose some species. For example, this one site is outside the distribution of the Chaco and peccary. Even though we're like 20, 30 kilometers from where it might be, that this change was big enough that it doesn't enter there. So that kind of throws a little wrench into the things, but for the most part the species are all the same. There's about 27 terrestrial larger meso mammals.
Nice. It provides a decent variety then of what you're going to see coming through at any point in time, which makes it interesting.
Yeah, and like I was saying, I think there's some, the mesomammal community is quite diverse. I mentioned there's 2 foxes, but we also have a raccoon species. With somebody from you come from North America, it's like, well, there's a raccoon. It's a different species, but it's still a raccoon.
Yeah, I saw the photo that you sent me, and I'm like, that looks like a raccoon, but not quite. Like, what is that?
A little skinnier, but you find them. It's amazing. You do find them near water, but you find these things out in the dry forest. I mean, just, somewhere where, you wouldn't think a raccoon would be, coming from North America.
Well, it seems like our raccoons up here are just about everywhere. Do you have the same issue with this particular species of raccoon down there, where it is just kind of found everywhere, or?
No, not really. Not really. It's not that. I've never seen one in, like residential areas. I think like possums. Yeah, you'll see our possum, which I didn't mention. Actually, they don't show up. They didn't show up much in the cameras. Some of these species don't. It's interesting, and that comes back to this understanding some of these trophic effects, potentially what's going on, or if species are actually present, or if there's some type of spatial segregation that, some of these species, like raccoon, you find around pasture areas, you're always there. Well, whereas, there's other species that might not be so forgiving or as plastique in the choice of habitats. Like I said, for example, the Chaco and peccary does not like to go out into pasture land or thing like that. Although you will find the other peccary species will enter, or at least go through pastures, that type of thing. So anyway.
Well, I also noticed too in some of the camera trap photos that you sent me, it looks like some of the jaguars and pumas are collared. Are you actually doing telemetry with those species as well, or are these just species that are individuals that were tagged from a different project and then you just happen to catch them on your camera traps?
No, we also have on one site, we're collaring jaguar and puma. Again, this was a project with my collaborator Marinella Valia, but also with Rocky McBride, who many people know. His father's actually, he and both his father do most of the captures, and now his son for the Florida Panther. And Rocky owns a ranch there, and he's been collaring jaguars since 2002. And so we're actually working on, he has a ranch himself, and with him we've been collaring jaguar and puma. And that project, we're able to overlay those data with the camera trapping too. So we have, we're getting the data on these individuals. We're hoping to collar some more. We already had one jaguar, pretty sure she got killed. About over 50% of the collared jaguars have been killed or suspected to be killed over the last 15 years. So and we can talk about more. That's one of the major issues with the large carnivores everywhere as persecution, retaliatory killing. So the idea we're looking at, we're able to look at habitat selection of these two conspecific species, which hasn't been done in Paraguay. And actually, I'm not even sure if, I don't think it's been done really with GPS telemetry anywhere.
By the way, you're getting a shout out here for saying that's a great summary of what all you guys are doing down there. It's from I missed the handle name there. I think it was a Jaguar Type Wild, oh, yeah. I believe. So
that's Marianella. That's my one of my co-PIs. She wrote. We presented all these projects together. So we're looking at basically. We're going to look at prey availability, habitat selection. We're able to incorporate that telemetry data into density estimates of those two species as well, particularly for puma, which it's very hard to identify individuals. With jaguar, it's quite easy just on their coat pattern. So to do spatial capture, recapture, and density estimates, which is with the camera trapping it's a secondary objective of the project. The first one was, yes, it's community, but when we designed it, we said, all right, we want to be able to estimate densities of these species that we can identify, which particularly jaguar, which is very important, but also ocelot, which we have a really good number of photos on this, and our camera spacing's enough that we're getting a lot of recaptures on those species. And we're going to try that some species that are harder, like tapir and puma, we're going to try, and I'm hoping next year to get into looking more into the computer identification and that type of thing. Individuals getting the machine learning and that stuff. But,
yeah, I've been hearing a lot of great things when it comes to the machine learning for like doing that, identification, which will be really interesting to see as that starts to take off in the next couple of years, to see how much it helps to automate everything, so that way you can have even more camera traps out there. You're not having to spend all the man hours physically going through those photos afterwards to try to identify everything.
I'm hoping. The thing is, it's just such another. It's another field really that I need to get some people that to work on it. I want to understand it, but to actually sit down and do it, I want to start working with some people. I got some stuff in the works, and it'd be great to have a grad student or somebody who's really into computer stuff.
Well, there you go, everyone. If you're listening to this right now and you're into computers and you're into ecology, there you go. So.
Yeah, better if you're in Paraguay. Right. Better if you're in Paraguay. It's easy, because we do. I do have one grad student now on one of these projects, and the idea is we want to get more students involved. The problem is that, like in Paraguay, there's no doctoral programs.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
There is a master's program, but so it means basically the one student I have now co-advising, he's at the University of Buenos Aires. So. Mm-hmm. And so it does make things difficult. But we also have like a lot of senior projects, senior thesis, undergrad students working on. And there's so much to do with all this data. There's a lot of opportunities, but there are opportunities for master's students. So if there's grad students in Paraguay listening.
Yeah, it definitely does make it a little bit more challenging if you can't have that student there for that longer period of time, of which you usually would have a doctoral student there for. Versus a master's student, it does make it harder to go like that much more into depth with the project that they're working on.
Exactly. Unless they go to the States or Europe or wherever, Brazil or Argentina, and take it with them, but it does make the logistics more difficult. So getting back to the telemetry, so right now we have two jaguars, two pumas collared. We're hoping to collar maybe 4 more. Like to get a couple female pumas, and basically the jaguar. There's 2 jaguars that we know are on the property from the camera trapping, and one was the photo. There was a kitten there. Mm-hmm. The mother with a kitten is another male, and so we're hoping. The thing is, we're entering summer, so it becomes issues. there's stress on the animal, which obviously, but also all the captures are done with hounds, so there's animal stress on all sides with these really, hot climate. So we're entering the rainy season, and it's very hard to get around in Paraguay and just about anywhere. But in the Chaco, when it rains, the soil turns to basically soap.
Wow.
And you don't go
That's
yeah.
a lot
So
of
if it
stuck
rains,
cars, then I'm assuming.
you can't go anywhere. You really do. You have to wait. And there's in the dry Chacos comprise most of it's in two political departments, Boquerón and Alto Paraguay, which are very large. And Alto Paraguay is along the Rio Paraguay, and it goes up along the Bolivian border and there is not 1 meter of asphalt in that whole political department. So, so if
and
it
here
rains,
I'm
what they
complaining
do
about
is they
like the
actually
2 dirt roads that happen to be left in my hometown, and everything else is paved.
Yeah, and what they do is if it rains, they have gates throughout, and there's these roads that go through, and they just close it off until it dries out, because they don't want people breaking up the roads, and particularly the cattle trucks, and it's actually one route that goes near the river that's sometimes for I think 9 months out of the year it's not passable. There's the last couple of years has been very bad. There's towns along the river that they've been completely cut off for 9 months. So the logistics of the summer is very hard. That's another thing. So most of our work we have from April through into October, but the April and October are really you never know. I mean, we went in March, we got into the field and we did some stuff, and we went running. It had rained a lot. We were able to get in, and we ran out to get back to Philadelphia with his asphalt. And I think the next day it rained. It rained like an inch, like 100 millimeters. So no, 300 millimeters, 30 centimeters. So that's a huge amount of rain. We got out of there. We probably still be there just about. But then in August it doesn't rain at all. So so when it comes June, July, August, September is when we really go full into it. And also it's not as hot. So meaning that it might get to 100 sometimes, or it can be freezing, like well below freezing, or in the same day it can go from being in 0 degrees Celsius to 38.
Wow.
It can be.
Yeah, we like to think that we have some pretty wild swings up here in Michigan, up in the States, but yeah, that's definitely pretty dramatic down there.
Yeah, well, when you work in dry systems, I'm sure a lot of people from from the Southwest U.S. and the Southwest can tell you the same thing. There's no cloud cover, and that sand just it radiates the heat. And I've seen the same thing in Argentina, and in like 35 degrees Celsius, and at night just being like 5-6 below. These, and then you're getting wind from the Andes and things like that. So I think it's a dry system thing in a lot of places, continental climate. So we're and with that telemetry work, we're also, again, it harks back to habitat use. So here we have these 2 big carnivores, which are generally big carnivores are not very picky. They're very very plastic in what they choose, and they'll walk they'll move long ways across a lot of different stuff, and but still we're interested. Okay, what's the ability, or how do they use this landscape? They do use these pastures, but how much are they dependent upon these curtains, these forest remnants and things? And for example, I had mentioned the female that we believe is dead, because I think she fought with another female. They were both collared, and they were together, and all of a sudden, just one day, she took off 45 kilometers.
Wow.
In just a couple of days, and she went through pasture land after pasture land, from forest patch, the forest patch, and she'd stay there a few days in one patch, and then she'd take off and go another 15 kilometers and go to another forest patch. And she just, unfortunately, she kept going closer to Philadelphia, which is more developed. And she went to an area with no forest patches, and we lost her signal. So, it's pretty, that's pretty much, those collars just don't go dead. It was a new collar.
Right.
So she probably got killed. And, other ones that have been collared, these jaguars have moved just large areas. Like I said, one had a home range of over 200,000 hectares. And I mean, just huge. And it went along these from forest remnant to forest remnant, using roads and just field borders and things like that. And that was an extreme case, that one. But they tend to use these linear habitats, apart from roads, but also these strips of forest and things like that. But then they go into the pasture and kill a cow.
And then ranchers are like, well, we can't have that. And
yeah, and like I said, that's the principal cause one of the principal causes of mortality, at least of the collared individuals. And that's pretty typical throughout its range. And this is talking about jaguar. I mean, puma are they're ghosts. They do well. That's why they have such they're a very adaptable species, but they just tend not to be seen. Jaguars tend to have an attitude. You'll see them laying in a road. They'll just lay in a road, and I'm a jaguar, and tough. Whereas a puma, you might see a puma run across the road, but that's about it. So they definitely have two different personalities, and unfortunately for the jaguar, that's it's one of its problems. And also, jaguars don't like to give up. They kill. So they kill a cow, they eat it, and they come back. And so usually they can be found. They stay somewhere very close, and if they can be shot or they can be poisoned easily. So
yeah, so it makes them just a little bit more confrontational with humans and much more likely than to be killed in that aspect.
Yeah, that's the problem with jaguar throughout its range, really. There is habitat loss, but and a lot of large carnivores, they're pretty, they don't care too much. They do all right in these anthropogenic landscapes, but they run into conflict, either because people are scared or, and rightfully so. I don't have to deal with that with jaguar being man-eaters. You have to be careful, but it's not like dealing with tigers or lions or leopards.
Okay.
Now, they don't like you walk. It's not good to walk in on a kill. They get cranky.
Well, I get cranky when someone walks in on my dinner. So.
Yeah, well, so that's one, so that's, one thing. But apart from that, it is pretty amazing. Sometimes you're out there and it's like, whoa, if they wanted to, they could eat me.
Yeah.
And we had one photo. It was funny, we changed the cards on the camera, and so went in, we were looking at the photos, and there was a jaguar, and then 10 minutes later, there I am in the camera.
That's not unsettling at all.
Yeah. I'm looking at the cat prints. I remember where I was, and you're looking at it, so well, those are fresh tracks, but they're like really fresh.
Yeah, they were kind of fresh.
Yeah. So, but I didn't know it at the time, but so luckily we don't have to deal with that.
Well, that's really interesting, and I'd love to keep talking, but I see we're out of time here because there's definitely so much more. I'd love to be able to talk to you about it and hear about how the ranchers deal with them, what their opinions are and everything else. But I think we're gonna have to save that for another time. So I would definitely love to have you back on at some point in time when you've got a little bit more data and you can tease apart a little bit more of what's going down there. But what little things do you want to leave everyone with that we haven't talked about here that would be good for everyone to know before we sign off?
Well, I'd like people to know that the Gran Chaco exists. Like I said, it's the second largest forested system in South America. A lot of people don't know about it. It's still an incredibly wild place. Where I work, there are the last uncontacted Native Americans outside the Amazon. So it gives you an idea how wild the place is. Unfortunately, it's not going to last for long, but I'd like people to be aware of it, that we have a high diversity, especially in mammals, of biodiversity. And for me, it's a magical system. It really is. And it's, it's not easy to get to know, but the Amazon's great. It's unbelievable, but the Gran Chaco is too.
Well, I definitely appreciate you bringing it to our attention, because I know before talking to you, I never knew about the Gran Chaco, and so hopefully everyone out there watching the broadcast too has now learned about it and will be keen to go out and find out a little bit more, because it does definitely seem to be a very interesting system with a lot of amazing wildlife down there. So I definitely really appreciate you sharing all the insights to the wildlife that you deal with down in the Gran Chaco.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm glad to talk about it.
So definitely a big thank you to Dr. Jeffrey Thompson for being on today on Scicomm Monday. We really appreciate you being on here. And for everyone who wants to be able to talk to him later, if you're watching this on replay or you just didn't get your questions in during the broadcast, please feel free to contact him on Twitter. His handle is Dr. JJ Thompson on Twitter. And then if you have any questions for me, you can either contact me at Scicomm Monday or at my personal handle, Wildlife BioGal. And then just to let everyone know, we're going to be off next week, because this weekend is Thanksgiving weekend up here in the States. So we're going to take it off to go hang out with family and friends and eat a lot of good food. And so, yes, definitely beware in my household, because I will be like that jaguar. If you come near my plate, I will start growling at you. So, but then I also want to just give a big shout out to all of our Patreon sponsors out there. Thank you for helping to make this broadcast possible. All your donations go to all the time and effort that goes in to put this broadcast on, the new equipment that we need to keep the broadcast going. So we definitely appreciate everything. And then a big thank you to Jason Leathers, who goes by I4MSU on Twitter. He's one of our major Patreon sponsors, and we definitely appreciate everything that he's doing for the broadcast. And if you really enjoyed Scicomm Monday and you want to help keep it going, please go visit our Patreon site and be one of our sponsors. It definitely helps us to be able to keep this broadcast going and bring all the science to you every week. And then we're also running our GoFundMe drive for the fall, so please go visit our GoFundMe site at Scicomm Monday Fall 2017 to help with the broadcast. And if you're a scientist or a Scicomer out there and you want to be on Scicomm Monday, please direct message us on Twitter. We'd love to have you on. We don't just deal with ecology, even though we do have a lot of ecologists on here, since I do ecology, but we're fans of all the STEM sciences on there. So science, technology, engineering, medicine, all of that, come share your work with us, and we'd love to talk to you about it here on Scicomm Monday. And with that, I just want to say to everyone, thank you for tuning in, and hopefully we're going to see you next time. So in the meantime, till then, till December when we're back on, go explore, do some science, have some fun, and we'll see you on the next Scicomm Monday.